If you play fantasy football, you're in the right place because this is one of the biggest edges you can find in all of fantasy. And that is knowing when to sell the right players after week 1 because so many people overreact to what happens in week 1. So in this video, we're going to break down 7 players that you should try and sell high, trade away right now while you still can. And I want to start with Marquise Hollywood Brown. And I also want to put this disclaimer out there before we get into all of the breakdown on Hollywood Brown. You're never trying to sell these players low. They're all in this video because they're quality players. They're probably all in my top 150 rankings for the rest of the season for a reason. But if you can trade them for a better player the rest of the year, you should do that off of one hot week when everyone's overreacting. So let's start with Marquise Hollywood Brown. This is a quality wide receiver in the NFL. As you can see, last year in 2024, he only played 2 games. But besides that, in his 4 previous seasons, over 100 targets, massive 145 targets when he was a wide receiver 1 last time with the Ravens, and then 100 targets. He obviously then comes out in week 1 of the NFL season on Friday Night Football in an exciting game against the Chargers, and he's supposed to be the wide receiver 2 with Rashee Rice suspended. Well, just 3 plays into this game, his teammate Xavier Worthy goes down with injury, and very quickly Hollywood Brown is the wide receiver 1. Also, Jalen Royals, a 4th-round rookie wide receiver, was out for this game. There wasn't many guys left, so 10 catches, 99 yards on a league high, led the entire NFL across all positions, 16 targets from Patrick Mahomes. That's obviously a quality role, and it's why Marquise Hollywood Brown in most leagues was the number 1 waiver wire ad. I mean, after all, if you look at it, he ended up going out there and he was on the field for 98% of the routes. He was there running a route for 46 of 47 dropbacks is what this comes out to. A 40% target share, well, even though he was still playing next to Travis Kelce, right? He was still earning 40% of the targets. He was truly an every down player. He was the first read on a lot of these plays. His biggest competition at the wide receiver position was Juju Smith-Schuster, who at this point, I think a lot of people know is on the downside of his career. Tyquan Thornton, mostly just a deep threat. And then we're getting into guys like Jason Brownlee, who are mostly practice squad players when there's not this many injuries or suspensions for the Chiefs wide receiver rotation. And it's also worth mentioning he played over 50% of the snaps out of the slot, the Rashee Rice role, the role that Xavier Worthy played down the stretch last year. This is a very valuable role in the offense. So all these are good things. Why trade him away? Well, I mean, let's be honest here. Xavier Worthy, as of right now, he's not going to get put on the IR. There's a chance he comes back in a few weeks. We know for a fact in 5 more weeks that Rashee Rice is going to return from a suspension. So this target share of 16 targets, which is probably going to be the most he sees all year, even if those guys are out, it's definitely going to be shrinking soon, if not right away in week 2. And then maybe by week 3 or week 4, Xavier Worthy could return, right? And then we know for a fact by week 7, Rashee Rice will return and resume being the number 1 receiver on this team. He'll resume going into that key slot role with Marquise Brown getting pushed back to the outside, which will shrink his target share. So yes, for another, let's just call it 1 to 4, maybe 5 weeks, you're going to get some high upside targets. Let's call it 6 to 8 per game out of Marquise Hollywood Brown. That's solid, but it's not week 7 through 18 when you need him for the playoffs, championship push, all that. Here is that confirmation from SportsMD analysis on the Xavier Worthy injury. He says that Xavier Worthy is considered day-to-day, is how they're like kind of just treating him. He's not yet practicing this week. Average return is three weeks from this injury with a very high re-injury rate. There's a chance if he would need surgery that it would end his season. As of right now, the Chiefs are not considering surgery for Xavier Worthy. But here's the thing about this. There's no reason to have him get surgery right now. Let him see in 3 weeks if it stabilizes. If it stabilizes, great, he can play with some sort of brace. If it doesn't, then at that point they can decide to get surgery. So we'll know more on Worthy in probably a couple of weeks. The other thing here is that Travis Kelce had a 10% target share in week 1, which is pretty gross for Travis Kelce. It was his lowest since 2017. We're no longer in the prime of Travis Kelce's career. I know he had that big kind of like a busted coverage touchdown in week 1, but he wasn't earning targets. I will say though, he's probably going to earn more than 10% of the targets moving forward, especially when the Chiefs have to game plan an entire couple of weeks now without Xavier Worthy as well. So I would say that those 16 targets that Hollywood Brown, if we pull it up right here, saw in week 1 are obviously coming down just naturally. And I think those targets will probably go somewhere around 7, maybe 8. And Travis Kelce's will start to go up from him seeing only 4 targets to probably him seeing also 7 or 8 targets. So everybody right now views Marquise Brown as the number 1 receiver for Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and thinks like, oh, is this guy a top 20 fantasy receiver week in and week out? At the end of the day, I think he's a quality option, but if you can, trade for him right now, or trade him away, I should say right now, because look at some of the deals happening. This is as I record this on 9/11, September 11th. He was traded 1 for 1 for Tyler Warren. Give me Tyler Warren all day. He was traded 1 for 1 for Rome Odunze. Give me Rome Odunze all day. Somebody, some fool, if you will, traded Brian Thomas off of a down game for Hollywood Brown. Obviously, I want Hollywood Brown there. Hollywood Brown for Calvin Ridley is a coin flip. I'll probably take Calvin Ridley at this point. For Trey McBride, I obviously want Trey McBride. These are a lot of deals happening right now, 1-for-1 deals. You could obviously mix in a couple of package items as well for Hollywood Brown. I would sell high, and I actually did sell high in one of my leagues 2 nights ago. Check this out. I was sitting in the movie theater in Austin, Texas with my cousin John. Sean, that is Jay Vetri, his team right here. I am obviously Sal Vetri. And I said, hey, I'll trade you Hollywood Brown for something. I look at his team. My team needs running backs in this league. And he had Tyron Tracy. Currently in my top 150 rest of season rankings that you can check out in the Blueprint at jointheblueprint.com and become a member of over 10,000 other people. I got Tyron Tracy here. I think he's a much better option, a workhorse running back in his offense for the rest of the year, at least as of right now. Hollywood Brown's kind of just a plug and play for the next 2 to 4 weeks. If I look at actually, if you want to just see this, and I show you my actual team here, you can see I have Josh Jacobs, I have Tyron Tracy, I do have Amarion Hampton as well. So outside of that though, I didn't really have much running back depth on this team. I'm loaded at wide receiver. I have a quality tight end, and then I obviously have a couple of different quarterbacks. Brock Purdy's banged up right now in this league. Nobody cares about my fantasy league, but those are the types of deals you can make. My cousin needed a wide receiver. I needed some running back depth. It was a perfect trade, and I think I got the better player in the deal. Now, the next player I think that you can end up going out there and trading away right now, and we have to talk about this in depth, is Garrett Wilson, because last year Garrett Wilson was one of the biggest target hogs in the NFL. He was playing with Aaron Rodgers, despite having Davante Adams next to him as well. Garrett Wilson last year went out there and had 153 targets, had over 100 receptions in a Jets offense that once again had an older Aaron Rodgers who was not as mobile and was playing with Davante Adams for the far majority of the season. So heading into this year, the concern was, okay, now you get a quarterback most likely downgrade from Aaron Rodgers, at least the passer, to Justin Fields, but there's no Davante Adams. But how much are they really going to pass the ball? Well, in week 1, Justin Fields had one of the best games, I would say, like of his career or in recent memory, and it ended up leading to Garrett Wilson having 7 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown in this game. But the problem was, and here's the deal, this is just not sustainable. Justin Fields had one of the best games of his career, and he still only threw for 218 passing yards, which, by the way, is way more than his career average of like 195 passing yards. So I just don't think that moving forward, half of the completions are going to be going to Garrett Wilson in this offense, and like 45% of the receiving yards are going to go to Garrett Wilson in this offense. It's just not sustainable. Defenses are going to be like, oh yeah, that's the only guy out here beating us. Let's shade some more coverage over there. Now, with that said, as expected, Garrett Wilson, he was out there every single play. 100% of the snaps, he had a 44% target share. Again, a 44% target share is not sustainable. At the end of the year, the NFL leaders in target share are going to be around 27, 28, maybe once in a while you get a 30% target share. Not 30 or not 44%. Again, unsustainable. And this Jets offense ran the ball a ton. Outside of, obviously they only threw 22 times in this game with a couple of throwaways, so they really only had 19 targets up for grabs because their 22 attempts, 3 of them were throwaways in this game. No interceptions for Fields. But you can see right here, 39 rushing attempts to 19 actual pass attempts when you factor out the throwaways. I mean, that is a massive concern. That is a very big concern if I'm looking at this as a Garrett Wilson fantasy manager. He had a good week for you, but this might be one of the best weeks because that's like maybe some of the higher end passing numbers you're going to get from Fields in 220-yard games. There's a pretty good chance that after what we saw in week 1, you're going to get a lot of this. You're going to get a lot of Breece Hall. You're going to get a lot of Braylon Allen. If we pull it up as well, you're also going to get, which was a big concern for me heading into the year, Justin Fields ran 12 times in this game as well. That's going to take away from everybody in the offense, not just the running backs, but of course, especially in the red zone, it's going to take away from some of the target share numbers of this offense. In week 1, according to the expected fantasy points over at PFF, the third luckiest, or you can say who scored more points than he was expected, was Garrett Wilson. He was only expected to score 13 points in this game, which is a solid fantasy outing. He ends up scoring 22.5 points. So again, he far exceeded his expectations. It was an unsustainable performance for him. So if you could, why not try and sell him for somebody who's going to be a little bit more stable week to week? I want to make it clear, Garrett Wilson is an excellent player. He was going in the late 3rd to the 4th round of fantasy drafts for a reason. He is a quality weekly starter in fantasy football. But if you can now upgrade him, and these are some of the trades currently happening, yes, people are literally trading Nico Collins for Garrett Wilson. That's crazy. Justin Jefferson for Garrett Wilson. George Pickens for Garrett Wilson is kind of a coin flip. Obviously, those other names you definitely want to be taking. I would be taking right now T. Higgins over Garrett Wilson. I'd be taking Kyren Williams over Garrett Wilson, right? There are trades out there to be had for Garrett Wilson over what might be one of, if not his best performances of the year that he already had in week 1. Now, if you want to see where Garrett Wilson ranks in my top 50 overall rankings for week 2, you can check it out completely free with the link in the description below, or just head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. That takes you to this page where you can just enter your email and I'll send you my top 50 overall rankings. That'll be updated every Thursday and Sunday, not just for week 2, but the entire season you could use it for. But here's the deal. If you want my full top 150 rankings, because the top 50 just isn't enough for you in your league, you know, my waiver wire tools and game-by-game matchup notes and a whole lot more, that's exactly why I built the Fantasy Blueprint. It's what I use in every single one of my leagues, and over 10,000 people are currently using in theirs. You can check it out at jointheblueprint.com or with the link in the description below if you want to schmack around your friends and actually win your fantasy league. All right, the next man up is Jaylen Warren that we have to talk about, because look, the story about Jaylen Warren and his career has been, this is a very efficient running back who's always been kind of the RB2, right? The Robin to Najee Harris's Batman. In 2023, you can see from Joe on Twitter right here, he points out that among 100 running running backs with 100 attempts in 2023, Warren was number 1 in evasiveness, number 1 in broken tackles, 5th in catches, 3rd in yards before contact. This is just how good he was on a per touch basis. He also ranked top 10 in yards per touch and yards per carry that year. Very efficient. This efficiency then carried over into 2024. Despite dealing with injuries, he was 6th in yards per route run, so an efficient receiver. And then you come back down to his yards per touch, 13th amongst all running backs, still averaging over 5 yards per touch. He's just been so good in his career. In fact, if we look at Jacob Gibbs' tweet here on Warren, then just gives you kind of the background. Since entering the NFL, 6th in yards per rush, 7th in yards per route run, top 5 in running back success rate, and that is as the RB2 in a run-first offense, of course, but as the RB2, right? And that most defenses knew this team was running, he was still top 5 in success rate. So now after this entire offseason and in the preseason and training camp and their own coach Mike Tomlin saying Jaylen Warren is our leading rusher, what did we get in week 1? Well, from the standpoint of carries, we got Jaylen Warren leading the backfield, seeing 11 of the 19 backfield carries in this game. He was not all that efficient, just 3.4 yards per carry, but the more concerning thing was this. He didn't play the majority of the snaps. Kenny Gainwell played 50% of the snaps in this game. Kenny Gainwell came in there and saw 37% of the rush attempts, 7 compared to 11 for Jaylen Warren. Kenny Gainwell ran more routes than Jaylen Warren. Out of nowhere, all of a sudden, the way that they used these players in week 1 was Kenny Gainwell in the Jaylen Warren role and Jaylen Warren in the Najee Harris role. It really didn't make any sense. But that's a problem because we thought we were going to get the routes run, right? These routes right here, according to Fantasy Life's data, we didn't think we were going to get just 26% of the routes for Warren, which isn't going to lead to a lot of targets and receptions for him, which is what we need if we really want to be putting him in our RB2 or flex spot. Instead, we got Kenny Gainwell playing 29 snaps, 25 snaps for Jaylen Warren, and the 3rd-round rookie Caleb Johnson, who maybe starts to see more usage as the year goes on, only playing 2 snaps. If we see how this broke down overall here, you can see that Jaylen Warren was getting, he's the blue right here, so let's actually look at this. According to PFF right here, the dark blue is Jaylen Warren, and the dark green is Kenneth Gainwell. So Kenneth Gainwell played all the 3rd downs, he played the 2-minute offense snap, the goal line work, the Najee Harris role, was going to Jaylen Warren, the short yardage work was going to Jaylen Warren. It was a very odd usage, which is exactly what we're now as fantasy players known that we're getting from Arthur Smith. It was just a 1-week thing, but it does make this backfield messy. And since in week 1, Jaylen Warren, if we scroll down here, was able to, on his 2 receptions for 22 yards, Jaylen Warren was able, right here, right, 2 catches, 22 yards, he was able to find the end zone, which allowed him to score 14 fantasy points in week 1. It was a messy 2 to 3 headed backfield. It did not look all that good. It was like the best possible outcome for the passing attack. Probably in future weeks, they won't be having 4 passing touchdowns and moving the ball that easily. So the story for me is a kind of messy backfield where he scored a touchdown, so maybe you can get a bailout and try and trade him away before this gets even grosser moving forward. Because odds are at some point, Caleb Johnson, maybe it's not week 2, 3, or 4, but maybe by week 5 or midseason or after the bye week, the rookie gets involved as well. It's just kind of a gross backfield at this point. So if you could trade Jaylen Warren for some of these deals right here, for Chris Olave, definitely. For Stephon Diggs, that's kind of a 1-for-1 toss-up. For DK Metcalf, definitely. For Hollywood Brown, yeah, I prefer Hollywood Brown there. For David Montgomery, I prefer Montgomery. For Jalen Waddle, I prefer Waddle, right? You can try and trade Warren because of the fact that he scored a touchdown, put up a decent fantasy day, ASAP. Now let's talk about Emeka Egbuka, and you might be saying, I don't want to trade him away. Listen, hear me out. Maybe I'm not going to tell you to trade him away, right? Let's actually listen on how we're going to discuss this one because I'm getting a lot of questions. That's why I want to talk about Emeka Egbuka. First off, if you're not familiar, which you probably are by now, one of the better college prospects that we've seen in the last few years at Ohio State, multiple 1,000-yard seasons despite playing next to legitimate studs, including 2024 where he went over 1,000 yards, had a 24% target share playing next to most likely the best receiver in college football, and Jeremiah Smith. He ends up going in the first round to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he ends up getting a ton of raving reviews this offseason. And also in the offseason, everything worked in his favor. Chris Godwin ends up having his injury last a little bit longer. His expectation is to be back by week 5. Jalen McMillan ends up having a neck injury. He's going to miss at least half, if not more, of the season, which allowed Emeka Egbuka immediately to enter the starting lineup week 1 next to Mike Evans, and things went really well for him. To the point where he led the Bucs with 67 receiving yards, and he found the end zone twice. He was one of the best plays in all of fantasy football in week 1. If for people who ended up drafting him in round 6, 7, 8, 9 of your drafts, right away you got paid off with a guy who can be a league winner for you, and in week 1 you got to see flashes of that in a big way, finding the end zone twice. I thought this was a pretty cool quote as well from Mike Evans. I'll kind of summarize it for you. It was basically him saying, like, we went into the huddle and the rookie Egbuka was like, we need to run this certain play. I'm going to beat this cornerback. And Evans was like, okay, sure, we'll run it. And then he ran the play. He beat the cornerback. He scored a touchdown. And if you kind of just want to visualize that play, you can see it right here. He ends up going in. He ends up running the deep post. He beats the cornerback. He scores the touchdown in that game, right? A big touchdown as well in the fourth quarter with only 59 seconds left. He has the second touchdown in just his first ever game in the pros. Now, the one concern for Emeka Egbuka in this game, like, he did run 97% of the routes. That's obviously great. He was a top 2 receiver with Mike Evans, with Sterling Shepard in the slot. but he only saw 21% of the targets. Now, 21% of the targets is still very good, right? Evans 28%, Sterling Shepard also saw 21% in this game, so it's not like he was some sort of target hog in the game. Overall, he saw 6 targets. He ended up turning those 6 targets into 2 touchdowns. Most weeks that won't happen, right? But at the end of the day, it was his first game ever. The fact that he only saw a 21% target share as a rookie in his first game, I actually view that as a positive. If you look at the expected points from PFF right here, they said that Emeka Egbuka had by far the biggest expectation compared to his actual points. He was only supposed to score 12 points based on his usage, which again is still a quality flex or wide receiver 2 or 3 for you, right? He scored 23.6 because of those touchdowns that he had. I'm not looking at this and saying that means I have to go ahead and trade Emeka Egbuka away. The guy literally scored 2 touchdowns in his first game ever. He had raving reviews all off season, and then his quarterback trusted him in the most important parts of the game in the red zone with less than a minute left to have the go ahead and ending up being the game winning touchdown. I'm not trying to sell high on Emeka Egbuka right now. So I'm going to recommend holding Emeka Egbuka, which I think should feel obvious unless you get these types of offers. Nico Collins for Emeka Egbuka. I love Egbuka. Give me Nico Collins. Devon Achane for Emeka Egbuka. Give me Devon Achane at this point, right? Once you start to get to some of these names, Trevion Henderson, I probably want Egbuka. Deebo Samuel, I definitely want Egbuka. T. Higgins, that at this point is starting to become a coin flip, but I probably lean T. Higgins. So again, I'm telling you to hold Emeka Egbuka unless somebody is a Bucs fan or just loves Egbuka in your league and they're actually going to offer you Nico Collins. All right, now let's talk about a running back. I want to talk about the veteran James Conner, who is coming off of a year where once again he was very productive in fantasy. He remained pretty healthy by his standards, only missing 1 game, 236 rushing attempts as well. You scroll over and once again he was a top 20 running back. His past 2 years, averaging nearly 16 fantasy points per game with the Arizona Cardinals. And then he heads into this year, and it looks like he's going to be the clear-cut RB1. And that's exactly, honestly, what we saw in week 1. James Conner comes out here, and he leads the backfield with 12 carries. He wasn't all that efficient, just 39 yards on 3.3 yards per carry. But the thing that was very interesting here, in a soft matchup against the Saints was what we saw from the backup running back, Trey Benson. We talked about this in our running back waiver ads video. Trey Benson was used much more in week 1 this year than really he was used at any point last year. Yes, James Conner still commanded the snaps at 64%, but Benson played 34%, which was more than he saw in most games last year. But more importantly, no other running back was used in this backfield. In past years, you'd see Amari DiMercato be involved on 3rd downs, but this year, there wasn't. It was just these 2 running backs, at least for week 1, James Conner and Trey Benson. And what that ended up getting you was Benson only seeing 8 carries, 69 yards, broke off an explosive play of 50+ yards. And if you look at the breakdown according to PFF right here, of the usage in this game, James Conner sees all 4 goal line carries. That's this light blue bubble right here. The green bubble, though, is Trey Benson. And Benson played 10 out of 13 3rd down snaps, which is where you'll see some check down opportunities, maybe some 2-minute offense work eventually. So this is very important because, again, last year he wasn't seeing this 3rd down usage. That was Amari DiMercato. Now, at the end of the day, James Conner is an aging running back. He's an older running back with an injury history of missing on average 3.5 games per year in his career. And Trey Benson is the younger 2nd-year player that they're giving more work to. He's actually earning more work and they're trusting him more. This is not a trend that I like for Conner. I will say he is clearly still the workhorse running back in this backfield, but if there was an opportunity to get off of him, I would maybe consider doing that. Because like Jaylen Warren, in week 1, James Conner was not efficient, but he ended up having 4 catches, 5 receiving yards, and he found the end zone. Him finding the end zone is the big thing there, and those 4 receptions in PPR formats, it allowed him to score 14 fantasy points, which is enough fantasy points in week 1 for people to be like, oh, he had a great week 1. It wasn't all that great, and maybe you can sell somewhat high on him now that we're seeing Benson getting more and more involved, and just the fact that Conner is an older running back with this injury history. Again, we're not selling low. We're only selling him if we can get something good. Recent trades that have happened in the past day or so: Ladd McConkey for Conner, Rome Odunze for Conner, Travis Etienne for Conner, Travis Hunter for Conner, Marvin Harrison Jr. for Conner. All 5 of those trades, I would much rather have the other player than James Conner personally at this time. Now, before we get into the next player that you can consider trading away, I don't know if you know this, but football is back, and so is your chance to cash in like never before. With my partners, DraftKings Pick 6, the official daily fantasy sports partner of the NFL, and your game day instincts can help you score real money fast. So now here's what you need to know. Just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats, from breakout rookies to elite quarterbacks, and unlock the upside every snap brings. And the better your calls, the bigger the payouts. Look, there's no gimmicks, no convoluted rules. It's just you, your reads, and your shot at big returns. Now, here's the kickoff bonus. New DraftKings customers get $50 in bonus picks with just a $5 entry on your first pick set. So all that's left for you to do is download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code SAL, make the right call, and ride the upside. In partnership with DraftKings Pick 6, the crown is yours. Now, the next player I want to talk about is Zay Flowers. He's maybe like one of my favorite players to try and sell away right now in leagues because he's obviously a real life quality receiver, but in fantasy, he's always been very volatile. I mean, let's look at it. Last year in his second year in the NFL, he did go for over 1,000 yards. He did earn 100 plus targets for the second straight year, 70 plus receptions. But you scroll over in this Ravens offense, despite Lamar throwing 40 plus touchdowns last year, he was still not even a top 30 fantasy receiver. The same thing for the year before that when he had 75 plus catches. But then he heads into week 1 of this season of his third year, and he ends up being the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, scoring 28 PPR points. He does it on prime time against the Buffalo Bills in one of the best games you have watched in a very long time, I would assume, having 7 catches for 143 yards and a touchdown. He was obviously the leading receiver. Nobody else on the team had more than 2 catches. Hopkins only ends up having 2 catches in this game. And then you look at some of the usage trends on Fantasy Life. He played every single route in this game. That's elite. And he ends up seeing a massive 50% target share. Absolutely insane. He saw 50% of the targets in this game. Lamar Jackson in this game only threw 19 times, right? A couple of those ended up being throwaways as well. So you're getting 50% of the targets going the way of Zay Flowers in this game. He obviously just 209 passing yards. Flowers accounts for over 140 of those, so he's accounting for 60-70% of the passing yards. This is obviously an outlier performance. It was a career high in receiving yards for Zay Flowers in a game where Lamar only threw 19 times. Obviously an outlier. Now you might be saying, well, the wide receiver room's pretty gross, and it is. Like, I think Rashad Bateman's decent. He didn't do anything in week 1. DeAndre Hopkins is obviously a little bit older, had that insane catch in week 1, but wasn't used all that much. And Mark Andrews disappeared once again. Isaiah likely will be returning soon from an injury. We'll see what happens there. So, like, in theory, Zay Flowers should earn a lot of targets once again. But as I mentioned, he just did this last year. He had 116 targets last year on a very impressive, if we pull it up right here from 2024 on Player Profiler, on a very impressive 26% target share. Top 20 in the NFL. So it's not like he's not earning targets. He's done it in past years. This is just a very run-heavy offense. I mean, even in week 1, in this game where he pops off, if we scroll down, the team still ran the ball a ton. They ran the ball 29 times compared to just 19 pass attempts. This was a game that went crazy. Over 80 total points. Both teams scored 40 points. That's probably not going to happen the rest of the season, right? It's going to settle back in to these 15 to 25 point performances. And that's where the concern for Zay Flowers can come in. Yes, this was a spike week in week 1 in prime time with everybody watching it, and he was the wide receiver 1 in all of fantasy football through 1 week. But we have 2 years of data with this exact same team, including last year's team that had Derrick Henry and Lamar, to know this is a very run first offense. Even if he's going to see a 27% target share, most weeks that'll only be 6 to 7 targets and 4 to 5 catches. We know Zay Flowers is not the guy we saw in week 1. He has that upside, but that's not the guy we saw. So yeah, I'd be trying to trade him as soon as possible. Again, do not sell low on him. Somebody got Justin Jefferson for him. Do that deal. George Pickens for Flowers is pretty even. Do the deals for Malik Neighbors and Jamar Chase. I know these seem crazy. They're absolutely crazy to me. I can't believe these are happening. But I mean, like, Breece Hall at this point is a fair deal to be doing, right? You start to scroll down a little bit more. Debo and Calvin Ridley, those are kind of toss-ups. Travion Henderson, I'd probably rather have still than Zay Flowers. I get it. You just saw him pop off in week 1. Let me remind you, he's played 2 full NFL seasons. He's never had the performance that he just had in week 1 this year, and his team only threw 19 times. This is not a new pass-heavy 45 attempt per game Lamar Jackson. He threw 19 times in week 1. Zay Flowers had like 70% of the receiving yards. That's an outlier. The next thing I got to talk about is David Njoku, because I'm getting so many questions about the Cleveland Browns tight end room, and it's for good reason. So heading into the season, I thought David Njoku was a quality pick in round 8, 9, or 10 of your fantasy drafts. A lot of it had to do with Joe Flacco being named the starter, and the last time we saw Joe Flacco with Njoku, things were good. To end the 2023 season in 5 games, you can see right here, Njoku averaged 8.6 fantasy points per game according to RotoViz's game split tool. 9 targets per game, 78 receiving yards per game. He was a top 3 fantasy tight end during this time. And then you get week 1's matchup this year. Oh, what a juicy matchup. Against the Cincinnati Bengals, arguably the worst fantasy defense or worst defense in football last year, and just a gold mine for fantasy points. That's what Njoku and Flacco were walking into in week 1. And then what if I told you Flacco would go out and throw 45 times and complete 31 balls in week 1? You might be jumping for joy saying like, oh, David Njoku probably absolutely popped off in this game, especially when I show you that only 2 wide receivers were used in this game. Cedric Tillman, for the most part, right? There were 4 guys used, but for the most part, with decent usage. Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy play 96% of the routes. Nobody else, Jamari Thrash and Isaiah Bond, play over 30%, but these 2 wide receivers only saw 20% and 20% of the targets. So if Joe Flacco is throwing the ball 45 times and these wide receivers are seeing like 8 or 9 targets each, there's like another 20 to 25 targets to go around. So David Njoku Njoku must have had a big week. Unfortunately, that's not the case. You can see down here, David Njoku just 3 catches for 37 yards. The guy who actually led the tight end room in receptions was Harold Fannin Jr., the rookie tight end. 7 catches tied Tyler Warren, both of those guys in week 1 of this year, for the NFL record for a rookie tight end making their debut. 63 receiving yards. He actually led the team as well. If we scroll over in targets in this game, he had 9 targets, which was a team high. Now let's scroll over to the tight end usage. Here's the thing that's interesting though. A lot of people are coming over to me and saying like, okay, so now Harold Fannin's the tight end 1 and David Njoku's just dust. Not the case. David Njoku still ran 20% more routes than Harold Fannin. He played way more snaps. Harold Fannin was actually being used almost like a slot wide receiver in this game, out of the backfield at times, sometimes as like a true tight end in 2 tight end sets. They were using Harold Fannin, as like Sean Payton has said this offseason, a joker. They were moving him all around the field, a lot of slot wide receiver routes. David Njoku was still on the field. He was getting his normal routes. The targets will follow in future weeks, in my opinion. I mean, as it stands right now, I think both of these tight ends are quality guys. For the rest of the year, for week 2, I think they're both top 12 tight ends. For the rest of the year, I think they're basically both top 12 tight ends as well. This is a decent situation and an interesting one. And Njoku was still operating as the clear tight end 1, and Harold Fannin was like this tight end 2/slot wide receiver hybrid role, and he produced in that role. So honestly, in my opinion, I think you could hold both of these guys. You're not going to be selling low on David Njoku. You won't get much in return. If anything, you could try and sell high on Harold Fannin, but he just set an NFL record with 7 tight end catches in week 1 of a season. I think you see what his upside is as the year goes on. Now, if you want to see the trades that are happening, Njoku for Zach Charbonnet, I mean, if you need it, sure. Njoku for Addison, I'd rather have Addison. Njoku for his teammate Tillman, I mean, if you don't have backup tight end depth, just keep Njoku. Njoku for George Kittle is interesting. If you think your team is going to go 2-0 this week, maybe you try and get George Kittle in that deal and just put him in your IR spot. If we look at some of the Harold Fannin deals happening right now, Harold Fannin, you could actually sell high on. Look at this. Harold Fannin for Tony Pollard, give me Tony Pollard. Harold Fannin for Pittman, I think I want Pittman in that deal as well. So you might be able to sell high on Harold Fannin. You won't be able to do so in Njoku. So hold Njoku. I would rather hold Fannin unless you can get somebody like a Tony Pollard or Pittman for him. Now, before we get into the next guy that I think you should maybe trade away, be sure to hit the subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds and we're oh so close to 200,000 subscribers. That would mean the world to me. It's a goal of mine. So I appreciate you all in advance if you just hit that button. All right, let's talk about Javonte Williams. We got to talk about it. In the first game of the season, Javonte Williams went out there and look, he had a pretty rough 2024. Like if we pull up his 2024, this was supposed to be his bounce back season. He goes out there and he only has 9.3 fantasy points per game. He ends up losing the job to just Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, a bunch of guys behind him. He ends up ranking like top 10 in overall targets and receptions for running backs, but doesn't do anything on the ground. Looked pretty bad. Then he signs with the Dallas Cowboys. Nobody thought much of it, but now he's their starter. And he went into week 1 and he was the clear-cut starter. The rookie Jaden Blue out of Texas was a healthy scratch. Javonte plays 80% of the snaps, 71% of the rush attempts, and 77% of the routes run. That means Javonte Williams was a full workhorse back. Very few running backs, and I'm talking less than 10 running backs in week 1, played 80%, I mean less than 5, played 80% of the snaps, ran 75% of the routes, and saw 71% of the backfield carries. That's pretty impressive. This ended up leading to Javonte having 15 carries, only averaged 3.6 yards per carry, but the big thing here, he punched in 2 goal line touchdowns. That's why his fantasy performance ended up being a top 5 finish on the week. He scored like 20 fantasy points because of those goal line touchdowns. But if you watch the film and you just look at the stats, he was the same old Javonte Williams. He was very inefficient. He did not really have that much good vision. The explosiveness wasn't there in my opinion, and he once again averaged like 3.5 yards per carry. Very mediocre. But we still have to just point this out. Like, there's not much here in this backfield coming for Javonte Williams. Miles Sanders, he looked good on his one long run in his revenge matchup against the Eagles, but then he fumbled, a pretty key fumble. Jaden Blue, I do think at some point this year could get more involved as a rookie, but he was a healthy scratch week 1. As of right now, it's not sure if he'll be playing in week 2 or not. I think that this was a rookie who ended up being a little bit behind in terms of development, and also part of that was due to his injury in camp. So maybe they're just trying to get him caught up to speed a little bit. Again, this is a rookie in Jaden Blue who has a nice role once he's ready in this offense. I mean, he caught 42 balls last year at Texas. He runs a 4.43 40 time as well. So like, he's an athletic player who has speed and can catch passes. Like, that's a guy who can get on the field and be used in creative ways in a Cowboys offense that looks like it's going to skew very pass heavy, especially if their defense isn't all that great, which it shouldn't be this year, and they have to play from behind. So at the end of the day on Javonte Williams right now, I'm kind of leaning to hold him because I don't see somebody taking his role. I think more weeks than not, he's going to see 14 to 16 plus touches and get all the goal line and red zone work. So I think Javonte Williams is a hold, but look at some of the deals you can get done right now for him. For Ricky Pearsall, I'll take Ricky Pearsall. For Jameson Williams off a down week, I'll take Jameson Williams. For Tyler Warren, who for the rest of the season right now might be easily a top 5, if not top 3 fantasy tight end with George Kittle injured, I'll take Tyler Warren. So once again, I'm going to recommend holding Javonte Williams unless somebody's just going to give you a loot for him. Yeah, definitely go get Tyler Warren if you can for Javonte Williams. So these are some of the players I had the most questions about, and I just wanted to address them here by letting you know 7 guys that you can sell and some of them who maybe you should just hold right now in fantasy football. Now, if you want to see some of the players that you should actually be trading for and not just trading away like the guys in this video, well, I released a running back and wide receiver version of that video, the guys you should trade for before week 2 begins. You can check out both of those videos right here. I think they're going to help you out a ton.